When the snows never melted and the sky stayed grey forever, that's when people knew the war was lost. The White Walkers came like a storm nobody could stop. First, they broke through the wall. Everyone thought the wall would hold. It had, for thousands of years. But it crumbled like dried bread. Some said the Night King just touched it and the whole thing fell apart, ice cracking from within. The magic faded. The wall didn't fall with fire or thunder. It just shattered, silent, slow, cold. After that, there was no barrier left between death and the living. Jon Snow and Daenerys tried to make a last stand. They gathered everyone in Winterfell. All the houses that still had people in them sent what they could. The Starks, the Mormonts, even the bloody Greyjoys. But it wasn't enough, not even close. The dragons helped for a bit. Fire against ice, that's what they all hoped for. But nobody counted on the Night King being smarter than just charging in. He waited. He let the cold do its work. People froze before they ever saw a White Walker. Villages in the north went silent overnight. Not burned, not sacked, just empty. Doors swinging in the wind, food still on the tables. You'd go into a house and find a family sitting there stiff as statues, frost on their lips, eyes wide open. They didn't scream. They didn't even get a chance. That kind of cold seeps in before you know you're dying. Winterfell lasted longer than most. The walls were thick, the people determined, but it was only a matter of time. They ran out of food first. The north had always been harsh, but this cold wasn't natural. It killed crops before they could grow, froze rivers to the bone. Supply lines were cut. No one could ride south. The roads were snowed in. The bridges snapped like twigs. The White Walkers didn't even have to fight at first. They just waited for people to start dying on their own. When they did attack, it was like watching a nightmare. Thousands of the dead, all silent. No roars, no screams, just the sound of snow crunching under their feet. They moved like water, climbing walls, breaking gates. The living tried to fight. Swords shattered against ice, arrows stuck in flesh that didn't bleed. And every man or woman who died, they rose again. Same eyes, same silence. They became part of the army. Arya tried to do it again, tried to kill the Night King like she did before, but he didn't come close this time. He stayed back, hidden, surrounded by a wall of the dead. No weak spot, no crack. People whispered maybe that one time he died was luck, a trick of fate. This time he learned. He wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. Daenerys died on the third night of the siege. Drogon went wild. The dragon screamed like 1,000 souls crying out, burned half the battlefield to ash. But then he turned on the army. Something happened to him. Maybe the Night King got inside his mind, or maybe losing her broke him. He flew off into the storm and was never seen again. Jon fought to the end, last man standing on the battlements of Winterfell, sword in hand, eyes burning like fire. But when the dawn never came and snow kept falling, he knew. He dropped the blade and stepped into the cold. They say the Night King didn't even kill him, just walked past him and let the frost do the rest. From there, the north fell in days. The Riverlands didn't stand a chance. King's Landing tried to prepare, tried to build walls higher, send soldiers north, but by then it was too late. The dead didn't stop. They didn't sleep, didn't rest, didn't argue or hesitate. Every army they met just became part of their ranks. People fled south across the narrow sea, but the cold followed. The oceans froze, and the ports turned to ice. Ships got stuck mid-journey, passengers trapped waiting to starve. The White Walkers didn't even need to cross the sea. The dead floated on the wind. Birds fell from the sky. Cities like Braavos and Pentos, they just went dark. No survivors, no messages. One by one, the lights of the world went out. In Old Town, the maesters tried to make sense of it. Books, scrolls, prophecies, all of it. They thought maybe if they understood the Night King, they could undo him. But knowledge means nothing when the library burns and the scribes freeze at their desks. By the time the cold reached dawn, people thought the sun would protect them. But the sun faded, the sky turned white, then grey, then black. No sunrise. Just the long night, forever. There was no final battle, no last hero, just silence, the kind that presses in on your ears and makes your heartbeat sound like thunder. The kind that tells you nothing is left. Now they say if you stand still long enough you'll hear them. The whisper of snow on stone, the crunch of 1,000 feet in the frost. The White Walkers didn't just win the war, they ended the world. Not with fire, not with rage, but with cold, slow silence. Not everything died right away. Some places held out longer than others. Little pockets of life clung on, hidden in caves, deep under castles, in old mines and tunnels. They called them the burrows. That's what was left of humanity. Not kingdoms, not armies. Just small groups trying to keep warm and stay quiet. There was one group under Storm's End. They found a way into the old cellars, deep beneath the keep, where the stone was thick and the cold couldn't reach all the way. Maybe 100 of them at first. Old men, women, a few children. They kept the torches burning day and night. Not for light, for warmth. Fire was the only thing that still made people feel alive. Food was always running out. Rats, roots, whatever. Dried meat they could find from old stores. They'd trade stories more than bread. It kept their minds sharp, reminded them who they were. Because out there in the cold, the dead were hunting, and they didn't forget. Some said you could survive if you didn't scream, if you didn't show fear, but that was just hope talking. The White Walkers didn't need fear. They didn't feed on it. They fed on heat, on life. You could be brave, or you could be terrified. It didn't matter. They'd find you just the same. The burrow under Storm's End lasted longer than most. A boy named Tom led them, just 16 but smart, knew when to keep people moving and when to stay quiet. He was the kind of boy who should have been a lord had the world stayed right. Instead, he was digging tunnels with his bare hands, trying to find a way out, or maybe a way deeper. One night something changed. The air got colder, even underground. The fires burned low, no matter how much wood they threw on. People woke up shivering, breath fogging up like ghosts. And then came the sounds. Not screams, not howls, just footsteps, soft ones, like something dragging its feet just above. Tom told everyone to stay quiet, to blow out the torches. They sat in darkness for what felt like hours, not daring to breathe loud. And then the ceiling cracked just a bit. A whisper of frost slid down the wall like a finger. They ran deeper into the tunnels. No plan, just instinct. Some didn't make it. The cold got in them. Eyes went glassy, fingers turned black. You don't even scream when it happens. You just slow down and stop, and then you're one of them. Tom and the last few got into the old sewer channels. They were full of rot and frozen filth, but they were tight, too tight for the dead to follow easily. At least that's what they hoped. They crawled through that stink for hours, until they found an old grate that opened to the cliffs by the sea, except the sea was gone. Frozen solid. Where there used to be waves and salt spray, now there was just silence and ice as far as the eye could see. And on that ice, far in the distance, figures standing still, watching. The White Walkers didn't chase anymore. They didn't need to. They just waited for the last lights to burn out, for the last breaths to fog the air. Further west, in the ruins of Casterly Rock, there was another group. Not as lucky. They tried to fight back, built barricades, burned everything they could, even set fire to the old gold mines. It kept the dead out for a while, but it also brought the smoke. People choked before the cold even reached them. A woman named Sarah led them. Used to be a knight maybe, or just someone who knew how to hold a sword. She tried to rally people, tried to train them. But what good is a sword against death that walks? They made weapons from dragonglass, some stolen from old battles. But there wasn't enough to go around. When the White Walkers came, they didn't break the walls. They just stood outside. For days, then weeks. The cold crept in. People started turning on each other before the dead even stepped through the gate. One man killed his own brother over a crust of bread. Sarah tried to stop it. She lost an eye for her trouble. In the end, they opened the gates themselves. Maybe to beg, maybe to join. Nobody knows what they said when the cold touched them. Maybe they said nothing. Maybe they smiled. Now the cities are just shapes in the snow. Shadows. You can walk through the bones of King's Landing and see the Red Keep buried in white, like a grave marker for the whole world. No fire burns in the hearths, no bells ring, just wind. They say the White Walkers didn't want the world. Not really, they just wanted it silent, still, perfect in its cold. After a while, people stopped keeping track of time. There were no seasons anymore, no days or nights, just cold. Some believed it had been years since the White Walkers took the world. Others thought it had only been months. Without the sun or the moon, it didn't matter. You just survived the next hour. And then the one after that, south of the ruined reach, there was a group that called themselves the Ashborn. Nobody knew where the name came from, but they were different. Not just hiding or fighting, they believed the world could be taken back. That somewhere, deep in the old ruins of Valyria, there was a weapon or a flame still burning. Something, strong enough to push the cold back even for a moment. The Ashborn were led by a woman named Maella. Dark skin, silver hair, maybe a descendant of some Targaryen bastard line, no one was sure. But she had fire in her blood, and that was all that mattered. She carried a blade made from obsidian, said to be forged by fire priests in the shadow of Dragonstone. She called it Emberfang. She and her people moved in the dark, hiding from the dead, but never running for long. They burned the ones they caught, left nothing behind. They found an old ravenry and tried to send messages south to any survivors. They didn't know no one was left to read them. Maella believed that if the White Walkers could be made, they could be unmade. She talked about the children of the forest, the old gods, the magic that once flowed through the land. But magic had gone quiet, like the wind had died. The world was too cold for it now. Still, she pushed forward. She took her people across what used to be the narrow sea, walked it. The ice was miles thick, solid and white, and beneath it were the bones of whales and ships and sailors who'd frozen trying to escape. On the other side, they found what was left of Essos. Empty cities, frost-covered fields, statues cracked in the cold. Even the Dothraki plains were buried under snow. The great horses had long since died, and the last riders had turned into beasts, half-starved, wild-eyed, wearing bones for armor. Maella tried to bring them in, tried to unite what little life was left. Some followed her, others attacked her in the dark, desperate and broken. She killed them herself, no mercy, and burned their bodies so they wouldn't rise. Every day, she looked west, toward Valyria. No one had gone there in years, too dangerous even before the White Walkers came. But now, what was left to fear? Death was everywhere. At least in Valyria, there might be something that fought back. Along the way, her people thinned out. Some froze. Others simply lay down one night and didn't get back up. They said the cold whispered to them, promised peace, promised warmth. Even a lie so sweet you almost wanted to believe it. But Maella didn't stop. Back in Westeros, there was nothing left but ghosts. The White Walkers didn't speak, didn't rule. They just existed, like the cold itself had taken form and decided. It didn't need anyone else. The north was a graveyard. Winterfell stood like a tomb, its gates frozen open, its halls full of silence. The Godswood tree still stood, red against white, but even it was brittle and cracked. No prayers were answered there anymore. In the Vale, the mountains were smooth, with ice. The Eyrie, once unreachable, was now buried under snow so deep you could walk over it without knowing. The Moon Door was just a memory. No one fell anymore. They just faded. And yet, rumors still passed. Somehow, across the dead world, whispers still traveled, of a fire deep underground, of a child born warm, of a place where the cold couldn't reach. The White Walkers ignored these rumors. Or maybe they didn't care. They had won. The world was theirs, not to rule, but to end. They didn't build, didn't hunt, didn't change. They were the ending written in frost. But Maella believed in something else. In her dreams, the few times she could sleep without the cold creeping into her bones, she saw dragons. Not the ones Daenerys rode, older ones, wreathed in shadow and fire, flying over lands that didn't freeze. She took it as a sign. Others thought she was mad, but they followed her anyway. Because what else was there? By the time they reached the edge of the old Valyrian lands, there were only 7 of them left, 7 against the end of the world, and they still walked forward. Valyria was not like the rest of the world. While everything else had turned to frost and silence, this place, this cursed place, still breathed heat. Not warmth like a hearth or sunlight, but something darker, old fire, sick and buried. The land hissed when the cold wind touched it, as if the world itself was resisting. Maella led the 6 others through broken stone paths that glowed faintly in the dark. The sky above Valyria wasn't black like the rest of the world. It pulsed red, like old blood behind a bruised eye. The air was thick, wet with sulfur, and every breath tasted like metal and rot. But it wasn't frozen. That alone gave them hope. The group didn't speak much. Not anymore. Words had become too heavy. They moved in silence, weapons close, eyes on every shadow. The ruins around them were jagged and towering, shaped like no city ever built by men. Some of the stone was melted, twisted, sharp like dragon. Teeth. There were statues of beasts no one had ever seen. Wings too wide, eyes too many, mouths open in screams that never ended. They saw bones, big ones, scattered everywhere. Some the size of wagons, cracked and blackened. Maybe dragons. Maybe something worse. Nothing moved. But the deeper they went, the hotter it became. A thick heat that didn't comfort. It pressed against the skin like hands trying to pull them down. On the 3rd day, one of the 7 collapsed. A boy named Elric. Just a teenager, born in the caves near Sunspear. He'd followed Maella from the beginning, believed in her more than anyone. He fell to his knees, eyes wide, mouth open like he'd seen something no one else could. Then he screamed, loud, sharp, broken. His skin blistered, steam rose from his mouth, and in seconds he was gone. Not dead, burned away from the inside, like something inside the ruins had claimed him. The others didn't speak his name after that. They just kept moving. 5 left. Maella's sword, Emberfang, began to glow faintly the deeper they went. Not just from heat, it pulsed, like it remembered something. She held it tighter. The handle was hot enough to scorch her palm, but she didn't let go. Not once. At the heart of Valyria they found it, a pit wider than any castle, glowing red and gold and black. The ground cracked with every step. They stood on the edge, looking down into what looked like the lungs of the world. Fire still lived here. Not like a candle, not like a forge. Alive, breathing, hungry, and at the center of the pit, floating just above the fire, was something none of them had words for. A shape, twisting in and out of itself, glowing, flickering. Sometimes it looked like a flame, sometimes a heart, sometimes a face. The longer they stared, the less they understood. The ground trembled. Behind them the cold came. The White Walkers had followed. Whether through magic or scent or some link older than time, they had come. Not many, just 3. But even one was, too much. The cold around them dropped fast. Frost chased their footprints. The fire hissed and spat, fighting back. The 5 turned to run, but Maella didn't move. She stepped forward toward the pit. Emberfang in her hand, glowing now like a star fallen to earth. The shape in the fire pulsed, then screamed. Not out. Loud, not in sound, but in their heads. A pressure. A call. Maela raised the blade. The first White Walker stepped forward, frost rising from its feet, eyes burning blue like a storm. It reached out, and Maela jumped into the fire. The scream that came then wasn't hers. It was the world's. The pit exploded in light, red and gold and white-hot. The shockwave threw the others back. One of them shattered like glass. Another burst into flames and vanished. Only two remained, crawling away, blind from the light, skin burned raw, and then came silence again. But it was different now. The sky above Valyria turned. The red faded, replaced by orange, then yellow. Then, for the first time in what felt like eternity, a sliver of blue. A piece of the sky had cracked open. The two survivors, one man, one woman, lay on the blackened stone, breathing hard, eyes wide with disbelief. And then they felt it, warmth, real warmth. It was small, faint, but it was there. Maela was gone, Emberfang too. The White Walkers, nothing left of them but steam. Whatever she'd done, whatever that fire was, it had pushed the cold back, even if only for a moment, even if only in one place. But that was enough. A crack in the ice, a flicker in the dark, a reason to hope. The change didn't happen all at once. That's not how the cold works. It doesn't panic, it doesn't run. But the White Walkers noticed it just the same. In the far north, where they stood like statues in the snow, heads turned. Ice cracked beneath their feet. Somewhere deep in their frozen minds, if they could even think, they felt it. A shift, a threat. It started small, a breeze, just one, blowing from the south, carrying not frost, but air that didn't sting the skin. That breeze travelled slow, barely noticed by the dead, but when it reached the still-burning ruin of Casterly Rock, it made the ash there stir for the first time in years. And when it passed over the bones of Winterfell, the snow melted. Just a little, around the weirwood tree. The two survivors from Valyria, Bren and Lys, didn't understand what had happened. They didn't know if Maela was alive or dead, or if she'd become part of the fire. But they knew something had changed, because they could feel the ground again. Not the cold stone that bit into your bones, but real earth. And they could breathe. Not with pain or steam rising from their mouths, just breath. Plain and warm. They knew they had to leave Valyria. Whatever Maela unleashed might not last. And if the White Walkers knew what happened, they'd come again. Stronger, smarter. But Bren believed the fire had left them something. A trail, a way. So they walked, through the twisted ruins and back across the ice that used to be the sea. The wind followed them now, but it wasn't hostile. It carried the faintest scent of smoke. Not death, fire. Real fire. Others noticed. Too, in the Frostwood, a small group of survivors who'd once hidden in hollowed-out trees looked up and realized the frost on the leaves was dripping. Tiny drops. Nothing anyone would notice unless they'd gone years without seeing water. In motion, one of them, a girl no older than 10, touched the bark and whispered, "It's warm." That whisper spread, like old magic waking up, stories passed from mouth to mouth, carried by those too stubborn to die. The cold had broken the world, but it hadn't killed everything. And now something was fighting back. In the ruins of Old Town, an old master who'd survived by boiling books for heat sat up from his stone bed and saw steam rising from a puddle. It had rained. Not snow, rain. Dirty, black, acidic maybe, but it was wet, and it wasn't frozen. He laughed so hard he broke 2 ribs, and further east, on the edge of the Shadowlands near Ashai, fire priests who had long since gone silent began to chant again. Their flames burned brighter. One of them saw Maela in a vision, standing at the center of fire, her eyes closed, her sword held high. The priest screamed her name over and over until his throat tore. The White Walkers, for the first time in history, moved with purpose. Not just walking forward like a tide, they started searching, hunting. They weren't used to resistance. They had ended the world. But now something was rewriting the end, and at the center of it, a trail of fire followed Bren and Lys. Wherever they walked, the frost cracked. Not fully, not fast, but it cracked. The dead didn't come near, not yet. It was like the fire had marked them and the cold didn't know how to touch them anymore. They found a village. Broken, empty, bones scattered in the snow like seeds. But the houses were still standing. They made a fire in the center, not expecting it to last. It burned all night. By morning, smoke rose into the sky, real smoke, thick and dark, and people came one by one. From the hills, from caves, from the forests, survivors, not many, starved, frostbitten, scared, but alive. They saw the fire and gathered around it like moths to the last light in the world. No one spoke for a while. They just sat. And for the first time in years, people wept. Not from fear, but from something close to relief. The world wasn't saved, but it wasn't finished either. Not yet. And then the girl came. No one saw where she came from. She was about 5 years old, wrapped in scraps of fur, barefoot. But her skin wasn't pale like the others. It was warm, glowing. She walked right up to the fire, looked at Bren, and said, "She said you'd be here." "Who?" he asked. The girl smiled. Maela. The girl's name was Nira. She didn't say much, just sat by the fire, legs crossed, staring into the flames like she'd seen them before, like they were old friends. Her hair never froze. Her skin stayed warm even when the cold winds blew. Straight through the broken walls of the village. She didn't shiver, didn't blink much, didn't even seem to breathe heavily. Just warm, always warm. She told them Maela had spoken to her, not with words, with light, in dreams, in the heat. "She's not gone," Nira said. "She's inside the fire now, watching." Bren didn't know what to make of it. A child, walking through a world of death, like it couldn't touch her. But Lys believed. She'd seen too much to doubt anything now. Nira wasn't just a child. She was something more. A message, a spark. The people who'd come to the fire stayed. There were maybe 40 of them now, the largest gathering anyone had seen in years. They built the walls back up with stone and bone. They hunted, not much, just rabbits, crows, whatever moved. The fire in the center burned day and night. It never went out. They fed it with whatever they had. Wood, old cloth, dried meat, sometimes even memories. Nira said the fire liked that. Stories, songs, names. She said fire remembers, cold forgets, but the White Walkers remembered something too now. They started moving faster. No more slow marches, no more patient waits. They wanted this flame gone. They sent the dead first, thousands, corpses that used to be knights, lords, even queens, all with blue eyes and empty hearts. They reached the edge of the village by nightfall. There was no wall high enough to keep them out. No weapons sharp enough to stop them all. Everyone knew this would be the last stand. Not for the world. The world was already gone, but for the chance of something more, a second chance. Nira stood by the fire, Bren and Lys beside her. Everyone else behind. The dead came silently, and then Nira stepped forward. She didn't raise a sword. She didn't scream or cry. She just opened her arms, and the fire followed. It rose from the pit like a serpent made of light, not normal flame. It was gold and white and red all at once, with veins of shadow twisting through it. It wasn't just heat, it was rage, memory, hope. It hit the first wave of the dead, and they turned to ash on contact. The second wave stopped. They didn't know what to do. They'd never seen the fire fight back like this. Then the White Walkers came, not many, just 5. But they walked through their own army, parting the dead like water. Their eyes glowed, brighter than ever. The frost around them spread in webs, up the walls across the sky. The stars dimmed. Nira stepped between them and the fire. One of the walkers raised a hand. The cold swept forward, a tidal wave of ice, screaming and cracking the very air, and Nira whispered one word. "Enough." The fire exploded. It didn't just burn. It changed the air, turned cold to steam, turned silence into thunder. It swallowed the village, the snow, the sky, and when it cleared, the White Walkers were gone. Not broken, not defeated, gone, nothing left but wet earth and steam. Nera fell to her knees. Bren caught her. She was breathing fast now. For the first time, she looked afraid. "It's not done," she said. "There's more. One left." And then he came. From the far end of the field where the ice didn't crack, where the sun still feared to shine, the Night King. Alone. He didn't run. He didn't slow. He just walked, silent as always, eyes burning like the last 2 stars in the world. Bren stepped in front of Nera, Lys beside him. Behind them, the survivors held what they could. Sticks, stones, knives made from memory. The Night King raised his hand. The fire dimmed. Nera screamed. Then, from the ashes, a sound. Wings. The sky broke open, and from the clouds came a dragon. Not Drogon, not any dragon the world had seen before. This one was made of fire, not scales, not flesh, flame in the shape of a beast, huge, terrible, beautiful. Its roar was the sound of mountains breaking. Its eyes were Maella's. It crashed into the Night King like a comet. The ground cracked. Light burst across the horizon, and for the first time since the world froze, the sun rose, really rose, gold and warm and wide across the sky. The ice didn't melt all at once. The dead didn't all fall. But the tide had turned, the fire had returned, and so had the fight.